The sharp sound sliced through the air, freezing every beat of my heart. I've already said it. I don't want that old woman at the table with us. Juliana's voice echoed through the dining room like thunder on a clear night, and I felt the world crumble around me. There I was, Lords, now, let's say, Mary Johnson, 73 years old, humiliated in my own home on Christmas Eve, in front of people who barely knew me. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clinking of a glass slipping from a guest's fingers, the sharp sound of glass hitting the floor. My son, Richard, lowered his head, unable to defend me. And I just remained seated in my corner, as I always did, swallowing yet another humiliation in the name of a peace that never truly existed. But what that woman didn't know was that her words had just awakened something in me that had been dormant for years. Something she would never imagine a useless old woman like me could possess. At that moment, looking at the embarrassed faces of the guests, at the thinly veiled contempt of my daughter-in-law, and at the cowardice of my own son, I knew my life was about to change forever. How did we get here? How did a woman who dedicated 43 years of her life to building a family, who raised a son with love and sacrifice, who opened the doors of her home to a daughter-in-law, who never respected her, reach the point of being treated as a burden? The answer was buried in decades of small sacrifices, of imposed silences, of unrequited love that transformed me into the shadow of my own existence. It all began when Richard brought Juliana, now, let's say, Jennifer, home for the first time, 8 years ago. I was planting roses in the garden when I saw them arrive, hand in hand. She was beautiful, undeniably so. Perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive clothes, a smile that seemed rehearsed in front of a mirror. Richard was radiant, and my mother's heart filled with joy to see my son in love. How could I imagine that this woman would become the poison that would slowly corrode our family? At first, Jennifer was polite but distant. She greeted me with kisses on the cheek that never quite touched my skin, smiled when Richard was around, but her eyes never showed genuine warmth. I tried to win her over. I cooked her favorite dishes, offered motherly advice, shared stories of my son's childhood. She listened to everything with forced patience, like someone enduring a tedious presentation they had to pretend to watch. The first time I felt true contempt was 2 years after the wedding. They had been living with me for a year, a decision I supported, believing in family unity. I fell ill, a bad flu that kept me in bed for a week. Richard had traveled for work, and I needed basic help, a glass of water, some medicine, a simple meal. Jennifer barely appeared in my room. When I asked for something, she sighed loudly, as if she were being tortured by having to care for her sick mother-in-law. "Mrs. Johnson, you can't keep playing the victim," she said one morning, when I asked her to call the doctor, because my fever wouldn't go down. Those were the first cruel words I heard from her, but certainly not the last. Gradually, Jennifer took over the house. She changed the decor without consulting me, reorganized the kitchen to suit her preferences, established rules that transformed me into a guest in my own home. When Richard came home from work, she always had a complaint about me, that I left the lights on, that I made noise early in the morning, that my friends talked loudly when they came to visit. My son, tired after a long day at work, just shook his head and asked me to contribute to the harmony of the house. The harmony of the house. As if harmony were my responsibility, as if I were the source of all discord. Little by little, I withdrew. I stopped receiving visitors so as not to bother anyone. I started cooking only for myself, using the stove at the times Jennifer allowed. I became a shadow, a silent presence moving around the corners, trying not to disturb the couple's life. The isolation grew like poison ivy. My friends drifted away, tired of always being greeted with a sour face by Jennifer. My siblings, who lived in other cities, called less and less. I myself discouraged the calls, afraid that Jennifer would complain about the noise or the time I spent on the phone. I closed myself off, nurturing a loneliness that seemed to grow every day. But there were moments when Jennifer's mask completely fell. Like that Sunday afternoon, when Richard went out to play soccer with his friends. I was in the living room, knitting a little sweater for a neighbor's child, when she appeared in front of me, with her arms crossed and an expression of pure hatred. "You know what your problem is, Mrs. Johnson," she said, her voice laced with venom. "You never understood that you're not needed here anymore." Richard grew up, got married, has his own life. You're just dead weight that insists on breathing the air in this house. My hands trembled, and the knitting needles almost slipped from my fingers. But I didn't answer. I never answered. I had learned that silence was my only protection against words that hurt more than slaps in the face. And don't you dare sit there with that victim face, she continued, approaching like a predator, sensing the fear of its prey. I know what you're doing, trying to make me look like the villain, the wicked daughter-in-law who mistreats her poor mother-in-law. But I'm not falling for it. Richard is my husband now, and this house will run the way I want it to. At that moment, looking at the woman my son had chosen to share his life with, I felt something die inside me. It wasn't just the hope of one day being friends, or the illusion of having a daughter I never had. It was the very will to fight, to fully exist in this space that was once my home. In the months that followed, the situation only worsened. Jennifer started finding fault with everything I did. If I cleaned something, she said it was dirty. If I didn't clean, she complained that I was messy. If I spoke, I was talking too much. If I kept quiet, I was being dramatic. It was like living in a prison where the crime was simply existing. The worst part was watching my son transform. Richard, once a loving boy who would run into my arms when he got home from school, became a distant man who could barely look me in the eyes. Jennifer had planted the seed of guilt in him, making him believe I was an obstacle to their happiness. Every conversation we had became a disguised interrogation, where he tried to find out if I had done anything to upset his wife. "Mom, Jennifer said you were complaining about the food last night," he'd say, with a tired tone that broke my heart. "Why don't you try to be more positive? We just want to live in peace." Live in peace, as if peace were possible in a house where my presence was seen as a declaration of war. As if it were possible to have peace when every breath I took was seen as an act of rebellion. That's how we arrived at that Christmas Eve. I had spent the entire day preparing the house for the party, as I always did. I cleaned every corner, arranged the flowers, polished the silver cutlery I inherited from my mother. I made sure to use the hand-embroidered linen tablecloth from my grandmother, the one that had survived 2 generations and held in its fibers the memory of so many happy Christmases. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe it was desperation, but I wanted that night to be special. I wanted to feel, at least one more time, that I was still part of that family. The guests started arriving at 7 o'clock. Friends from Richard's work, colleagues from Jennifer's gym, people who barely knew my name. I sat in my usual place, in an armchair in the corner of the room, far enough away not to be in the way, close enough not to seem like I was hiding. I smiled when someone looked my way, nodded discreetly, but no one came to talk to me. I was the human decoration of the party, present enough not to seem ignored, invisible enough not to bother anyone. Then I heard Jennifer talking to a friend in the kitchen. They didn't know I could hear them, and her words pierced me like shards of glass. "I can't stand that old woman anymore," she said, her voice full of irritation. "She doesn't do anything all day, she's just dead weight. And the worst part is that Richard doesn't have the guts to put her in a nursing home. He feels sorry for her, you know." Her friend murmured something I couldn't hear, and Jennifer continued, "I even told him today that I didn't want her sitting at the table with us. It's Christmas Eve, I want it to be special, and I couldn't stand looking at that bitter face all night." I felt my blood run cold. So that was it. Not even at Christmas dinner would I have the right to sit at the table in my own house. The humiliation that was to come had already been planned, coldly calculated to show me my place in the family hierarchy. When she came out of the kitchen and announced that dinner was served, everyone went to the table. I remained seated, waiting for my invitation, which I knew wouldn't come. And then it happened. One of the guests, a kind man who had been polite to me throughout the evening, noticed that I wasn't getting up. "Mrs. Johnson," he said with a gentle smile, "aren't you going to have dinner with us?" The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Jennifer looked at me with eyes that spat fire, and I knew the moment of truth had arrived. I took a deep breath and said, with the firmest voice I could muster, "I think I will. After all, it's my house." That's when she screamed. The scream that started this story, that froze time and changed everything forever. The most transformative stories often originate from the most painful moments, and that's why I need to share with you how this night changed not only my life, but the way I see the power that exists in every woman who has ever been silenced. If you also believe that every woman deserves to be heard and respected, subscribe to the channel to continue following stories like this, because together we are stronger, and every shared story can be the light someone needs to find their own voice. After Jennifer's yell, something inside me broke. It wasn't my heart that had been broken so many times it had learned to function cracked. It was something different, deeper. It was the invisible chain that bound me to that submissive version of myself. I rose from the armchair with a dignity I didn't know I still possessed and walked towards my bedroom. Each step was a silent declaration. I would no longer accept being treated like trash in my own house. I closed the bedroom door and sat before the vanity mirror. The reflection staring back was that of a tired, bruised woman, but not a defeated one. Each wrinkle on my face told a story. The lines around my eyes were from so many smiles given when I still believed in people's goodness. The marks on my forehead were from sleepless nights, caring for Richard as a child. The wrinkles around my mouth were from swallowed words, stifled screams, from everything's fine, said when nothing was fine. I opened the vanity drawer and took out a wooden box I hadn't seen in years. Inside were old photographs, yellowed letters, and documents that held secrets I had sworn to take to my grave. But that night, faced with that final humiliation, I knew the time had come for some truths to come to light. Among the papers, I found a letter that would change everything. A letter I had hidden from Richard all these years, protecting him from a truth that could destroy the image he had of his father. A letter written by my late husband, Albert, days before he died, confessing something he never had the courage to say in person. My dearest lords, the letter read in his shaky handwriting, I need you to know the truth about our financial situation. The house isn't in my name, as I always said, it's in yours. I transferred everything to you years ago, when the business started to go wrong, to protect our assets. You are the true owner of everything we have. I never had the courage to tell you, because I was afraid you would feel overwhelmed by this responsibility. Forgive me for my cowardice. My hands trembled, holding that paper. For 8 years, I had behaved like a guest in my own house, accepting orders from a woman who was nothing more than an invader. The deed to the house, the investments, the main bank account, everything was in my name. I was rich, independent, powerful, but I had chosen to live like an emotional beggar. I rose from the mirror and opened the closet. In the back, behind the clothes I had worn for years, was the navy blue suit I bought for Albert's funeral and never wore again. It was elegant, well cut, and reminded me of the strong woman I used to be. I put it on slowly, like a warrior putting on their armor before battle. When I left the room, the party had lost its rhythm. The guests talked in whispers, clearly embarrassed by the scene they had witnessed. Jennifer pretended normality, serving wine with a forced smile, but her hands trembled slightly. Richard was leaning against the wall, avoiding looking at anyone. I walked into the living room and positioned myself in the center, where everyone could see me. My voice, when it finally came out, was firm and clear as it hadn't been in years. I'd like to talk to all of you, I said, and silence was immediate. Especially you, Jennifer and Richard. Jennifer looked at me with a mixture of irritation and disdain. Mrs. Johnson, this isn't the time for drama. We have guests. You're right, I replied, opening the letter I held in my hands. We have guests, and they deserve to know the truth about this house, and about who really calls the shots here. The color drained from her face. You see, I continued, addressing the guests, for 8 years I allowed myself to be treated like a nuisance in this house. I let them humiliate me, silence me, make me feel like dead weight. But today, I discovered something interesting. I showed the letter to everyone. This is a letter from my late husband, confessing that this house, all the investments, and all the properties are in my name. I am the legal owner of everything here. The silence was deafening. Jennifer had turned as white as a ghost. This means, I continued, savoring each word, that during all those years you treated me like an intruder. You were just a guest in my house. A very ill-mannered guest, I might add. Richard approached, confused. Mom, what are you talking about? I showed him the letter. Your father transferred everything to my name years before he died, to protect our assets. I never knew, and you made me believe I was a charity case in this house. Jennifer finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate squeak. That's a lie. Richard, she's making this up to cause trouble. The documents are all at the registry office, I said calmly. I can prove every word. I saw the exact moment reality hit Jennifer. Her eyes widened, her mouth fell open, and for the first time since I'd known her, she was completely speechless. But don't worry, I continued, addressing the couple. I'm not going to throw you out. I'm not like you, but things are going to change drastically from now on. I walked to Jennifer, who had leaned against the wall as if she needed support. First change, you will never again speak to me in the tone you've used for all these years. You will never again make decisions about this house without consulting me. And you will never again try to exclude me from family meals. She tried to speak, but I raised my hand, silencing her. Second change, you're going to apologize. Not now, in front of everyone, because that would be unnecessary humiliation, and I'm not you. But you will apologize sincerely, for every cruel word, for every humiliation, for every time you tried to make me feel like trash. I turned to Richard, who stood like a statue, processing the information. And you, my son, I said, my voice heavy with deep sadness, will have to decide what kind of man you want to be. The one who allows his wife to mistreat his mother, or the one who protects the people he loves. The party ended right there. The guests said their goodbyes quickly, clearly embarrassed, but also impressed by the transformation they had witnessed. Only the three of us remained in the room. Jennifer tried one last offensive. You can't kick us out. We have rights. We've lived here for years. As I said, I'm not going to kick you out. I replied calmly. But you will learn to respect me, or you will choose to leave yourselves. In the days that followed, the dynamics of the house changed completely. Jennifer, stripped of the power she thought she had, became a different person. It wasn't immediate. She tried a few times to revert to her old behavior, but my firm gaze was enough to remind her of the new reality. A week after Christmas, she came to me while I was in the garden tending to the roses. She stood there for several minutes before she could speak. Mrs. Johnson, she finally said, her voice low and hesitant. I need to apologize. I stopped pruning the flowers and looked at her. I'm listening. I was terrible to you. I said unforgivable things. I treated you inhumanely. Her words came out in gasps, as if each one cost a piece of her soul. I have no excuse for my behavior. I was jealous. Jealous? I asked. Genuinely surprised. Of the love Richard feels for you, of the history you have together, of the way he talks about you when he thinks I'm not listening. She wiped away a tear that rolled down her face. I never had a present mother. My mother abandoned me when I was 5, and I was raised by an aunt who saw me as a burden. When I saw Richard talking about you with so much affection, I felt a rage I couldn't control. I put the pruning shears on the ground and approached her. Jennifer, your pain doesn't justify how you treated me, but it explains a lot. I know, she said, sobbing now. And I want to change. I want to learn to be a daughter to you, if you give me that chance. At that moment, looking at that broken woman before me, I understood something profound about forgiveness. You don't forgive because the person deserves it. You forgive because carrying anger is a poison that kills the one who keeps it. We all deserve a second chance, I said, gently touching her shoulder. But real changes take time and consistent actions. In the months that followed, Jennifer proved she was serious. She started small, making my breakfast, asking about my day, including me in household decisions. Gradually, we built a relationship that had never existed before. Richard also changed. The revelation about the house was a shock that forced him to confront his own cowardice. He started seeking me out more, talking about important things, including me in family decisions. It wasn't easy for him to accept that he had failed me, but he made an effort to regain my respect. A year after that transformative Christmas Eve, we were again preparing the house for the party. But this time, I was in my kitchen, directing the preparations, while Jennifer helped me, following my instructions with genuine respect. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, as she seasoned the turkey, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear. Why didn't you use that letter before? Why did you wait so long to show us the truth?" I stopped mashing the stuffing and reflected on her question. Because I thought love was about sacrifice, about diminishing myself so that others felt bigger. I learned that night that true love also requires self-respect. She nodded, understanding, and I learned that respect isn't earned through fear or manipulation. It's earned through consistent actions and genuine love. At that second Christmas dinner, I sat at the head of the table, in my rightful place. Jennifer was on my right, Richard on my left. The guests, some of the same ones from the previous year, treated me with respectful deference. I was the matriarch of the family, and everyone knew it. During dinner, Jennifer stood up to make a toast. "I'd like to toast the strongest woman I know," she said, looking at me with shining eyes. "To my mother-in-law, who taught me that it's never too late to start over, and that forgiveness is the greatest act of courage there is." I raised my glass, and for the first time in many years, I felt I was exactly where I should be. Not because I had power over those people, but because I had finally found the balance between loving others and loving myself. After dinner, when the guests left and Richard went to bed, Jennifer and I stayed in the kitchen washing the dishes. We worked in comfortable silence, each lost in her own thoughts. "You know what I regret most," she said suddenly. "What?" "All the years we wasted fighting when we could have been friends." I smiled, carefully drying a plate. "We didn't lose those years, Jennifer. We needed them to get here. Sometimes you need to lose yourself completely to truly find yourself." She hugged me then, a tight and genuine hug that sealed our new relationship. And at that moment, I understood that the true victory wasn't in having proven that I was the head of the house. It was in having discovered that I was the master of myself. Today, 3 years after that Christmas Eve that changed everything, I wake up every day knowing who I am. I am Mary Johnson, a 76-year-old woman who learned that it's never too late to stand up and demand the respect she deserves. I am a woman who discovered that true power lies not in dominating others, but in mastering oneself. Jennifer and I developed a relationship that goes beyond mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. We're friends, confidants, partners in building a truly united family. Richard found the man he should have always been with, and our house became a real home. But the most important lesson I learned was this: no matter how old you are, no matter how long you've accepted being mistreated, you can always choose to stand up and say enough. The power to change your life has always been in your hands. Sometimes you just need the courage to use it. To those reading this story and recognizing themselves in it, know that you are stronger than you think, that you deserve respect, love, and dignity at any age, and that it's never ever too late to start over. Dignity doesn't expire, self-love has no age limit, and the courage to change can be born at the most unexpected moment, even during a cruel shout on Christmas Eve. This is my story. This is the story of a woman who lost herself along the way, but found herself when she least expected it. And if I could do it, you can too. Because we are all stronger than we think, and we deserve so much more than we accept.